Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, November 15th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Beto O'Rourke. Beto is back. He is announcing his bid for governor of the state of Texas, expecting to challenge Governor Greg Abbott in his run for a third term in the 2022 midterm election in the state of Texas. Now, Beto O'Rourke is a recognizable name, one, because he ran for United States Senate back in 2018 and actually came very close to defeating incumbent Senator Ted Cruz there, came within a margin of 3 points across the state. In addition to that, Beto O'Rourke ran for president in the 2020 presidential election and actually at one point in time was peaking at third place nationwide over many senators, representatives, governors, and ultimately ended up losing his race, dropping out before the primaries had even begun. But the fact is, he rose to a sudden surge of popularity, and that put his name on the national map. And now he's returning instead of going to an even bigger type of win. Obviously, president is the most you can go to, but instead of turning to a House seat or some other type of congressional seat running in 2024, he is instead turning his focus and emphasis on this governor's race in 2022. Now, I first want to preface this by saying, yes, Beto O'Rourke is at a disadvantage, and I do not think he expects to win this race. And we'll talk about why this strategy here actually will benefit Democrats for a long-lasting time, primarily because he is adopting a strategy similar to the likes of Stacey Abrams back in the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial race. And what Beto O'Rourke is doing can be sort of summarized in a nutshell. Beto O'Rourke running to lay out the foundation and the ground game for Democrats in 2024 to potentially win that Senate race that Beto O'Rourke lost 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, potentially do better than they did in 2020, even if they may start to see some lack of support amongst minority voters that they previously had, or even if Joe Biden ends up being unpopular and loses the election, that Democrats will have some type of major gains in the state of Texas. So, in essence, Beto O'Rourke is sort of like a sacrificial lamb in the point that most people do not expect him to win, and honestly speaking, I don't think the O'Rourke campaign expects to win. But they will certainly try, and in trying, will benefit Democrats down the ballot. So let's talk about why Beto O'Rourke even is one of the notable names for this governor's race in the first place. In the 2018 Senate election, I had mentioned how Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke faced off against each other. Beto O'Rourke came within 3 points of winning a very contested Senate race here. Now, Texas isn't really a swing state in the past. I mean, taking a look at its electoral history, only recently has it narrowed up to single digits. In 2016, it became single digits for the first time in the 21st century. Actually, taking a look at an even better year for Democrats in 2020, 2008, in which Barack Obama won 365 electoral votes, won in Indiana, North Carolina, won Iowa, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota by likely margins, won Michigan, a state that Donald Trump won in the 2016 election. Obama won it by 17 points. Obama was competitive in North and South Dakota. In fact, North and South Dakota were more competitive than Texas in the 2008 election. So looking at Texas for a long-lasting period of time, straight from the beginning of the 21st century, when Bush won it by 21 points, went on to win it by 23 points in 2004, narrowed down to a 12-point margin for John McCain, expanded to a 16-point margin for Mitt Romney. But then came along Donald Trump and the population shifts across the state. With an influx in population, increasing minority voting population, ultimately Democrats started to perform better. And we first saw that in 2016. When Hillary Clinton lost the state by just a margin of 9 points. Now, 9 points seems like a lot, but understand the national circumstances that we were in. Republicans ended up with a trifecta following this election. Donald Trump had just won the states of Florida, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all states that Barack Obama carried 4 years prior. And yet Texas narrows down to a point where Texas was actually closer than the state of Iowa. In fact, in the 2020 election, it narrowed up even again to a point where Texas was closer than Iowa and even Ohio. Isn't that really interesting? Texas came down to a margin of 5.6%, and considering Beto O'Rourke's recent successes, or not necessarily successes in the truest sense, but moral victories for the Democratic Party, he is now the most established and well-known name for the Democrats in the 2022 race. Now, taking a look at the governor election back in 2018, Beto O'Rourke is likely in for a bigger fight because Greg Abbott, on the same ballot that Beto O'Rourke was able to get 48% of the vote, we saw the Democrat in the Texas governor's race on the same exact one get only 42.5% of the vote. Greg Abbott was popular. He is popular. He is a governor who is highly regarded across the state of Texas. Not so much recently, following the snowstorm / blizzard, whatever you want to call it, back in February, in which there were millions of people out of power. Many people in Texas had suffered from the infrastructure that was the power grid. Ultimately, things were falling apart in Texas for this time, and they were not prepared at all, in any sense, for this snowstorm whatsoever. And the blame fell on Governor Greg Abbott. So that certainly has made him a more vulnerable target, but it doesn't make him the most vulnerable. Right now, in my recent projection in the governor's race, I actually say that the Republican Party will likely win Texas by a likely margin. I'm expecting anywhere between 5 and 15%, and given the national circumstances, it could go above 15%. But I do think that Beto O'Rourke offers some type of benefit for the Democrats running down the ballot. Again, his main goal, I do not think, is to win this race. I think he certainly could come close, the same way that Stacey Abrams ran in the governor election, not with the under assumption that she would win this race, not with the assumption that this race would be easily won, but more so fighting for a reason. And rather than turn her efforts to Joe Biden's ticket as his VP nominee or turn her efforts to the Senate election, either of the two that were up in Georgia, she instead decided to remain behind and lay out the ground game and ensure that the state of Georgia flipped blue in a future election. Instead of her being in office immediately, and I'm sure she'll run for governor in 2022, but instead of her being in office immediately, she turns her efforts to flip Georgia on another level. And we're actually starting to see parallels here. I think Beto O'Rourke is trying to replicate to a T what Stacey Abrams did in the state of Georgia. Let me show you what I mean by that. In the 2016 election, Donald Trump won the state of Georgia by a margin of 5.1%. 4 years later, Joe Biden wins the state by a margin of 0.23%. That is a 5.3% shift from 2016 to 2020. Looking at the state of Texas, Beto O'Rourke might be going for a similar 4-year plan. Texas is a state where Donald Trump won by 5.6%, nearly identical to what his margin was in Georgia back in 2016. By the time we reach 2024, considering the trajectory over recent years from 2012 to 2016 to 2020, it is entirely possible that with this ground game, with these efforts, what might be a failed gubernatorial bid could translate into a Democratic presidential victory on the Electoral College in the state of Texas in 2024. And I know it may seem like a pipe dream, but it was done in Georgia, and it's been done in Arizona, and it's been done in a number of other states when it comes down to these competitive races. And if anyone could do it, it would be Beto O'Rourke. I don't think he will win this race. That's why my projection does not change with this recent announcement. Likely Republican, might even move into safe Republican by the next projection. I'm not going to make that call right now. It will be determined based off of further analysis. But the point being that Republicans have this advantage in Texas, and it doesn't really matter. But Beto O'Rourke will provide Democrats with that ground game, will provide them with that energy and enthusiasm that he brought to the Texas Senate race. The one interesting thing about Beto O'Rourke that I remember so distinctly from the 2018 midterm elections was that Beto O'Rourke went and visited every single county in the state of Texas. Now, I want you to take a look at it. It looks like grid paper from your math class, right? With how many counties here, and the straight lines, and the blocks here. And you can see that in many of these counties, there are very few people. For some of these counties, you see the voters less than 1,000 in the 2018 midterm elections. For some of them, you see votes that are very small. Some of them are a little bit larger, but other than that, I mean, you are looking at practically many of these counties with much less population than Harris County, or Travis County, or Dallas County, or Tarrant County. But Beto O'Rourke was willing to visit all of them, and I think that's what really resonated with many of these voters. You see, Ted Cruz was a recognizable name and is a popular name in the state of Texas. I mean, Texas was closer than Indiana, Missouri, Tennessee. These are all states that the Democratic Party previously held or thought would be in contention. And I say Tennessee because they ran a former governor who won his previous election before 2018 with every single county across the state and over 60% of the vote. It's very interesting to see how the Democratic Party did better in Texas than other states that they had incumbents in. Very fascinating, if you ask me. So looking at the margin in the state of Texas, this is why Beto O'Rourke is deemed electable. While Greg Abbott may be on a pathway to re-election, I honestly think that is a very probable outcome for Greg Abbott, even against Beto O'Rourke. I do think that there are some long-lasting benefits of having Beto O'Rourke on the ticket for the Democratic Party. Looking at those who are running in the governor election in the state of Texas, it's actually interesting. You have Allen West, who was the former chair of the Texas Republican Party. He actually has a pretty good footing across the state. I don't think he'll defeat Greg Abbott. I think that most people are going to realize that this race is not going to be competitive in the primary, but potentially in the general. But taking a look at what we've seen so far, with Donald Trump endorsing Greg Abbott, with Ted Cruz endorsing Greg Abbott, with Ken Paxton endorsing Greg Abbott, we know that this is a done deal. We know that Greg Abbott is going to win this nomination. And as for the Democrats, don't expect anything besides Beto O'Rourke. In fact, the Democrats have been holding off on this field, and we've known for quite some time now. I've made multiple videos talking about how Beto O'Rourke is likely going to run for governor of the state. And that's exactly what happened here. The Democratic Party cleared the field. They knew that they were not going to run anyone because Beto O'Rourke was by far the most electable and strongest candidate that they could have ran amongst those declared, and mostly amongst those in the potential column. I still do think that there are some internal quarrels that I have with myself talking about, would Julian Castro be a better nominee? Would Joaquin Castro be a better nominee? Would Wendy Davis be a better nominee? Probably not for Wendy Davis, but it's entirely possible for Julian or Joaquin Castro. I think that is something that could actually happen. I think that could be maybe a little bit better for Democrats in terms of restoring support from minority voters. But Beto O'Rourke also has a pretty strong track record in the state of Texas. While it may be a loss, it was a loss that came with tremendous victories across with it. And what I mean by that is Beto O'Rourke was able to bring along many of these Democrats down ballot because people were inclined to vote for him and consequently were inclined to vote for Democrats. Now, Greg Abbott, again, had an individual appeal to the state of Texas. But taking a look at Texas actually on the House map, I do want to say that it actually mimicked what we saw on the governor's map. On the Senate map. And I'll show you in that just a moment. Let's go ahead and go back to the 2018 gubernatorial races in the state of Texas. And let's see here if we can find the overall national elections, the 2018 gubernatorial races. And then we can take a look at races beyond this one. I want to see if we can, 2018 elections in the United States. I want to show you what happened in the United States House of Representatives in the state of Texas. Because ultimately, it resulted in a near replication of what we saw on the Senate map. And that was thanks primarily to Beto O'Rourke. Taking a look at the margin here, what was a margin of 2.6% translated to a margin of 3.4% on the House of Representatives map. But when Beto O'Rourke is off that ballot in 2020, what happens is Republicans end up winning the popular vote in the House elections by 9 points. You need someone on that top of the ticket that's able to narrow it down. And unfortunately for the Democratic Party, Biden losing by around 6 points across the state translated to about a 9-point loss across the House of Representatives map. So obviously there was a bit of a difference there as compared to 2018, but ultimately someone at the top of the ticket doing well is able to carry across people down the ballot. And considering that we are going to be working within a different type of Texas map, a different type of Texas electorate, and a different overall race and year and understanding of the President of the United States, it's best for Democrats to have someone they know can help them down ballot. It's not just this governor's race. It's not just a few competitive House elections. And actually, in Texas, it's only going to end up being one competitive House election, or maybe 2 or 3 at most, compared to the previous, 9, 10, 11. But overall, taking a look at the state itself, I will say that Beto O'Rourke is likely going to benefit Democrats beyond 2022, but also in 2022. And while in himself, he may be seeming like a sacrificial lamb, I can tell you right now, Beto O'Rourke would not put himself out there if there was no gain to be made by either him or the Democratic Party. He would not run 2 years after 2 years after 2 years just to lose again. Just to lose, right? And of course, he probably is going to lose. But I say this in the way that while he may lose, Democrats might not. And whoever is that Democratic nominee in 2024, they might be springboarded by his campaign from the 2 years prior. The same way that this happened for Stacey Abrams in the state of Georgia. And I also see this as something that can be shown with his refusal to change major stances that he took back in 2019 that ultimately seemed to completely remove any chance of electability in the state of Texas. Him standing by mandatory buybacks for AR-15s and assault weapons don't help him in Texas, and I think he understands that. You know, when you are looking at the team, the campaign staffers for Beto O'Rourke, I'm sure they cringed when they saw this headline, but they knew that that's what he believed in and that's what he wants to stand for. And while that may not win him the governor's mansion in the state of Texas, standing up for what you believe in, number one, is always important, and number two, this might further show that that's not his end goal. His end goal might be a blue Texas by any means necessary, and that includes running strong nominees even in years that you might not see favorable. I made a video very early on in the 2022 campaign season where I talked about how the Democratic Party needs to run strong nominees regardless if the race is deemed competitive or not. Because at the end of the day, laying out the ground game, putting someone out there that people can actually fight for and can actually believe in is more important than winning one race when you can win the entire war later down the line. This is one battle for the Democratic Party that they already know they are probably not going to win. But when it comes down to the impact of Beto O'Rourke being on that ballot, his organizing and potentially entire state, county-wide campaign, that could certainly help the Democratic Party in the future, and I have no doubts that it will for 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.